Hey, good morning, friends. I'm so glad you decided to join me to get your day started with a biblical perspective. Today, we're going to continue with our Religious Relics series and finish up the 10 Commandment tablets. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, just to do a quick recap, in the last episode, Moses met with God and received the first 10 commandments. He was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. As he was there, the Israelites started to rebel. They were like, where's Moses and why is this taking so long? So they created a calf to worship. After all this happened, Moses went down the mountain. He saw what was going on among his people, was so angry that he actually dropped the 10 commandments and they broke. And the Lord ended up punishing the people first by death with Moses leading the charge, but secondly, he hit them with a plague, the people with a plague. So we leave them off with the plague. And the Israelites are nomads at this point. They're wandering. They're not in the promised land. They don't have a place to be. They're just going round and round. So after all of this, God directs Moses to lead the Israelites to the land he had promised Abraham. And this is in Exodus 33. So we are given a picture as to how God meets with Moses and his people as they travel. Remember, this was prior to the Ark of the Covenant. So the first time when Moses went on Mount Sinai, he did get instructions for the Ark of the Covenant. But by the time he came down, there was all these shenanigans going on. The tablets broke, yada, yada. So we're not building in the Ark of the Covenant yet. We had to deal with, that situation first. So I thought it was really cool to see how God actually met with his people in the Old Testament before the Ark of the Covenant. Super interesting. So we are going to be in Exodus 33:7, and I hope you find it interesting too, and sorry if you don't. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of the meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of the meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of the cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke to Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of the cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their own tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So I just think this is a really wild image where you would just see this giant pillar cloud standing outside the entrance of the tent, and you just knew it was the presence of God. I just can't even imagine, were all the animals quiet? Did it darken outside? What really happened? Obviously, that's not in scripture, so I can't add it, but just the presence of God being there, just the whole vibe of the area, I'm sure was very powerful. So God appeared as a cloud a few times throughout the Old Testament. And clouds are actually mentioned throughout the Bible in a variety of contexts. So Exodus 13 says, "By the day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of a cloud to guide them on their way, and by night the pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of the cloud by day nor the pillar of the fire by night left its place in front of the people." Exodus 40 says, "For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day and was a fire by night, in the sight of the house of Israel throughout all their journey." So God again appeared as a pillar for his people there, a pillar of cloud. And 1 Kings 8:10 says, "And it came to pass when the priests came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so the priests could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house." Psalm 97 says, "Clouds and thick darkness are all around him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne." Jeremiah 4 says, "Behold, he comes up like clouds, his chariots like the whirlwind. His horse are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined." Now, you may be surprised, but there are actually a lot of varying arguments and theological debates on clouds in the Bible. and how they're used throughout Scripture. So in regards to the pillar leading Israel, which is the main one we're talking about now, some think that there were 2 pillars of clouds with Israel, one for the day and one for night. Some say that there was one and it would change during the day and during the night. Others say it was more figurative. It wasn't a literal cloud. And as to the post-apocalyptic language of the coming on the clouds, honestly, you could spend your lifetime researching this because there are so many different arguments when it comes to the phrase on the clouds. Whether this is Jesus literally coming back in the clouds, or if it was just imagery of judgment coming, or if it symbolizes an actual warfare coming, there's a great debate. So definitely, if you want to do a word study on clouds in the Bible, you could spend a long time on it. I felt compelled to at least let you know that clouds are controversial in the Bible, so you definitely should do a deep dive if you find it interesting. So fast forwarding to Exodus 34, God meets with Moses again and gives him the second set of the 10 Commandments, because obviously we needed to get those. So he tells Moses to cut 2 tablets out of stone and brings them up to Mount Sinai again to meet with God. And there he is for 40 days and 40 nights. After this meeting, Moses' face is radiant. The scripture accounts, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant of the law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to him, and Aaron and the leaders of the community came back to him. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. I thought this was really interesting because I've never seen a picture of Moses with a veil over his face. Every depiction I've ever seen of Moses, he's like a strong looking guy with a long beard and a staff in one hand and the 10 Commandments in the other, which now that I'm reading this, I'm also like, the 10 Commandments were chiseled out of stone. They were very heavy, and I don't think that's an accurate depiction of him just like chilling with all this stuff in his hands. But anyways, really interesting that he went before the Lord and had this radiance about him that was actually somewhat terrifying. They were afraid of him. And it doesn't seem like it went away. I don't see where it scripture says it's faded. I just don't see it reference again. But it was very interesting that he just had this radiance about him. So there we have it. Moses gets the second set of the 10 Commandments, the tablets. So we know that there they are, and that's all taken care of. So when Moses comes back, he and the Israelites get to work on what God commanded him to do previously when he was on Mount Sinai, and this includes building the Ark of the Covenant, which we will get into in our next episode, I promise. But I do want to pause for a moment and just dwell on the magnificence of God portrayed in these chapters. I think it's very easy, especially for us who grew up hearing these stories, to breeze by the details. After all, we know God is God and he's amazing and we get it. He's glorious. But I want to spend a second to truly sit and absorb the grandeur that God's presence brings. Scripture is filled with depictions and stories of God's power. In Exodus 20, it says, "Now all the people witnessed the thundering, the lightning flashes, the sound of trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar. Then they said to Moses, 'You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die.' And Moses said to the people, 'Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that the fear may be before you, so that you may not sin.'" 1 Kings says, "And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore into the mountain and broke the rocks into pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." 1 Chronicles says, "Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power and the glory, the victory and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and is on earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honors come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might. In your hand is to make great and give strength to all." It's important from time to time to step back and truly meditate on God's amazingness. These people trembled, they feared. As the Lord passed by, the wind tore the mountains in half and caused an earthquake. His power, the glory, the victory, he reigns over all. God was not surprised when Moses first broke the 10 Commandments. He was not surprised when the people turned away from him. He dealt with it, he dealt with them, and then he continued on with his plan, which included the 10 Commandments and the other instructions he gave Moses on the mountain. As you reflect on your life, friend, maybe it's a day being caught up in the what ifs or I should have. Perhaps your kids are growing and you're aging and you're uncertain of the future. Maybe your life didn't go how you thought it would or should. Maybe you've been thrown a curveball that you would have never seen coming in a million years. God's plan is still going to move forward. His power far exceeds any worldly situations or obstacles. Faith is not about a tidy little checkbox or a flow chart that connects all the dots. Faith is not cookie cutter. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." The God who reigns over the universe, the one whose hand is power and might, is there. Even when you go off course or make mistakes, and even break the original 10 Commandments, God's greatness will proceed, and moving forward in our faith doesn't rest on us. Our faith rests on the everlasting strength God provides. And a few points to reflect on today. Looking back over your life, how can you see a situation where God was at work when you didn't know what was going on? Is there a circumstance in your life that you have been fretting over or wrestling with that you need to give over to God? What mistakes are you allowing to stop you from pursuing God's direction in your life? Well, thanks for listening, friends. And if you stuck with me through this episode, you're awesome because it was definitely not where I thought it was going to go. So next episode, we will be continuing with the Ark of the Covenant and our Religious Relics series. So I hope you enjoy it. My Meet My Friend episode was delayed, but it will definitely be out hopefully next week. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys. Again, if you haven't followed, make sure you follow or like or whatever. I am on Rumble and YouTube again, so feel free to follow me there as well. I hope you all have fabulous weeks, and I'll talk to you soon.